Reading about how there are more bacteria on an ATM than on a toilet seat makes me realize I don't know much about banking. All right, please welcome to the stage John Emerson.
When I looked over at my opponent and realized what a no-good son of a bitch he was, I remembered what started all this. I was in the 3rd grade, and some older kids drugged me through the dirt in the playground. And I vowed, when that happened, that it was never going to happen again. And it didn't. Now, when I was in grade school, they didn't have football and wrestling. Hey, you son of a bitch, I'm going to kick your ass. You just wait. They didn't have football and wrestling. What they had was baseball and basketball. And I wasn't very good at baseball and basketball. So I figured that baseball players were prima donnas and basketball players were pussies. Think about it. Think about it. Why should it be a foul when you touch your opponent? Now, fouls and penalties should only be assessed when you break a rule that could cause broken bones and other major injuries. I'm coming after you, you son of a bitch. Now, when I got to high school, they had football and wrestling, and I was one of those popular jocks back when that was a compliment. I had a couple of things going for me in my philosophy. One was Vince Lombardi. He was a very popular coach back then. And he didn't invent this phrase, but he used it quite often. Winning isn't everything. Winning is the only thing. I also had some luck going for me. Actually, I've been lucky all my life. One of the most lucky guys I know. So, just think, you're a popular jock and your name is John, and you go into what we called the snack shop, which was a little restaurant that kids hung out in after school day was over. So I'm walking into the snack shop and I'm going back to where the booths are, and there's a song playing on the jukebox by Tennessee Ernie Ford. And it goes like this. Every morning at the mine, you could see him arrive. He stood 6'6" and weighed 245. Kind of broad at the shoulder and narrow at the hip. Everybody knew he didn't give no lip to Big John. Now that's luck. You son of a bitch. I am coming after you in just about 2 minutes. So, I had a good high school career and I went to college. Fortunately, I got a grant in aid to play football that paid my tuition. I remember walking in to the student union on my first day of classes, and I looked around and I realized that nobody knew my name. Nobody knew what a success I had been in high school, and if they knew, they sure wouldn't even care. But I vowed before I left, they were going to know my name. I was fortunate they didn't have wrestling when I started there, but in my sophomore year they got it, and we had a coach that was one of the best promoters that I've ever met. He built a wrestling team and a story that made people come to the wrestling matches. We even had cheerleaders. So here we were, this little gymnasium, which has since been torn down, every seat was filled. People were lined up 2 deep along the walls. Not even any standing room left. The referee called my opponent to the mat. He called me to the mat. When we walked out, all I could think about how I was going to ruin his whole day. Referee blew the whistle. We started to wrestle. 45 seconds later, he was on his back on the mat, pinned. I was the winner. The referee raised my arm in the air, and the place went crazy. Later, I would go on to be elected May King and eventually voted into the Athletic Hall of Fame. Talk about luck. So, I graduated. Went to work for a good company, had a good job, but I wasn't my own boss. I wanted to be my own boss, as you can tell, you know. That's my orientation. So, even though when I was growing up on the dairy farm, I knew I never wanted to be a dairy farmer, I talked my wife into buying the farm for my mom and dad, and we were dairy farmers. Now, there are some disadvantages to being a dairy farmer. One is you have to work your ass off, but there are some advantages. When somebody drives in your lane and you own the dairy farm and you don't like the color of his eyes, you just say, "Harry, you turn this car around and get it off my land," and he leaves. We had some other advantages. We had fun in different ways than you have fun when you're living in the city. I'll just give you one example. When our oldest son, Brett, went to Ohio University, by the way, all 3 of our children went to Ohio University and graduated. You know,
4 kids.
what did I say, 3? Oh. I forgot about that one. It's not mine. Anyway, Brett would bring these girls home, and we were going to show them some real down-home Apple Creek dairy farm hospitality, but we were going to put them through a little test also. Now, this test consisted of taking a television and putting it on the burn pile, and then taking my 870 Remington shotgun that we didn't use for anything except having fun. It was a light gun, so that meant it kicked harder and spoke louder than other guns. Now, most of these girls hadn't even seen a gun, let alone shoot one. So we made sure they got the first shot. It had a telescopic sight on it. All you had to do was line up the crosshairs with the television screen and pull the trigger. And every time we had one of these girls do that, they hit the screen because they didn't flinch, because they didn't know what was coming. Well, the gun would go off. They would almost get knocked down. Their hearing would not be so good for a few minutes. And we would laugh like hell. And I never could figure it out, but none of them ever came back. So anyway, we're getting to the end of the dairy farm time, and I ran for county commissioner. Now, and I won. I think the only reason I won was because my dad was county commissioner before me, and they thought they were still voting for him. But nevertheless, I did win the election. It's a 4-year term. Oh, I forgot one thing about the dairy farm. When I'm running the dairy farm, and you're a kid working for me, your life is kind of hard. But I don't think it was a bad thing. Their life was hard. They had to take some shit. But they all grew up to be very, very successful. Now, what I do regret is some of the time with my wife, Toby. She took things from me that she shouldn't have had to. And I'm sorry for that, and I apologize. So, anyway, I run for re-election, and I don't win. I don't win for several reasons, but one reason is I'm arrogant. So, I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do. Dairy farm era was coming to an end. I didn't have a job. I always was interested in driving a truck, so I got a job driving a semi. On my first, not my first trip, but early in my employment, I had a load to go out to Michigan, and I was going to go through western Ohio. And I actually didn't think about it when I started the trip, but as I'm going along and thinking about it, driving west on Route 30, I realized I'm going to drive very close to where I went to college. And the more I thought about it, the more apprehensive I became. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got to the turnoff. But fortunately, there was a place to pull over right there at the crossroads. I pulled over, got out of the truck, walked up to the sign that said, Ohio Northern University, 1.5 miles that direction. And I realized that I was 1.5 miles and 30 years from where I had some of the best experiences in my life, and I was driving a semi. That job didn't last too long. I didn't make any money, but I did it for 1.5 years, and I'm glad I did, because I'll tell you, when you're a truck driver and you're on the road, you meet some very interesting people. So I quit that job, and I got a better job. I got a good job. And one thing, the first thing that I found out when I went to this job was that while I was being a dairy farmer, the world had changed and I had not. My first job right out of college, we had a pool of girls who typed up our monthly there were no girls. There was a computer, and you better type it up yourself. Quite a shock. But I did okay, and I got promoted. Until I got promoted above the level of my competency. And they fired me. And the reason they fired me was because I was a prick. Now, you can imagine how I felt after this. And I knew I had to get my life straightened out. So I went to a doctor. And after telling him my story, the doctor said, "John, you need some therapy and some counseling." And I told him that I thought therapy and counseling was bullshit. He said, "I might disagree with you on that, but in that case, I'm going to give you Lexapro." Now, Lexapro is a prescription medicine that they give to people that suffer from anxiety and depression. And I suppose I was suffering from that. But what I found out when I started taking Lexapro, that I could be a nice guy. I no longer hated people. It made my life easier. Didn't have to holler at people anymore. Such a good thing. Now there are two caveats that I want to give you, though I need to tell you about Lexapro. The first is that if I had been taking Lexapro when I was wrestling in college, I wouldn't have won very many matches, because I would have been unable to generate the adrenaline through hate that it took me to win. The second thing that I want to tell you, the second caveat, after the show, if you see me, you better be careful, because I ran out of pills 10 days ago.